Hi, my name is Robert Young. I'm the Director of Operations with Hydra-Slide, and today we're going to go over some training on our LP350 hydraulic skidding system. I'll give you a brief overview of what we're going to discuss today first. We're going to go over the track sliding surface, what it is, how to maintain it, how to repair or replace if the track surface gets damaged. Then we're going to go to track setup and alignment, the importance of setting your tracks up properly, how to connect the tracks. Then we'll get into the slider plates and load placement on the system itself, the pusher head, and the push cylinder that powers the whole system. Once we're done that, we'll go over how to properly store and maintain your system, and then some brief troubleshooting of some problems you may occur in the field. Here we have one of our LP350 track plate sections. You'll notice that the outside edges are this slate gray material. This is our graphite dry lubricant that we put onto the system. The graphite provides about a 15% friction factor, which for hydraulic skidding is a relatively high friction factor. However, this is what we want because when you're sliding, you always need to apply a push force. That means that the hydraulic cylinders will be what is pushing the load. If anything fails or there's a problem, your cylinder stops, anything goes wrong with the move and you want the system to stop, it will stop. If you want to get going again, you need to apply hydraulic pressure to get the load moving. When we apply the graphite to the slider plate, the manufacturer of the graphite suggests that you apply it to the bare steel. So we don't treat the surface steel, we simply do a rough sandblasting of the surface of the steel, and then we roll it on with a brush or a roller. The graphite we use on our systems is slip plate number 1. Slip plate number 1 is a solvent-based graphite. It comes in a 1-gallon can. We ship slip plate number 4 with our systems because it's water-based and it allows the system to be shipped as a non-hazardous. When applying the slip plate to the surface, you want it to be free of any debris or grease, so clean it well. With heavy use, the graphite will eventually wear down. You only need to reapply the graphite once you start to see bare steel. Once you see patches of bare steel, then using a wire brush or some other method, you can remove most of the graphite, clean the surface, and then roll it on, and you'll be good to go again. Just remember that the graphite itself requires a minimum amount of curing time. Slip plate number 1, 8 hours for full cure. Slip plate number 4, the water base, requires at least 24 hours for full cure. One thing we get asked quite regularly from customers is if we can apply a dish soap or a grease to the track surface to make it even slipperier. And our answer to that is no. We do not want to decrease the friction factor on these systems because of safety concerns. The more slippery we make this, if a block pile fails or the ground gives way while you're sliding over it and the system approaches a decline, then without an adequate friction factor, you could have a runaway load on you. So for safety, do not add anything other than graphite to this track system. What I'd like to discuss next is system setup. The first thing you'd like to do before setting up your system is hydraulic skidding involves sliding your load in a straight line on guided tracks. So you want to make sure that you have a clear, defined path, straight line path from where you're picking up your load to where your load is going to end up. Otherwise, if you've got any turns, you would need to utilize a turntable or some other means to rotate the load. Otherwise, you need a straight line path. Next, you want to make sure that because the tracks themselves, the low profile systems is a very thin track, the tracks themselves need to be fully supported. Now by that we mean no large gaps in between the tracks, and the track connections need to be fully supported. You can span small gaps, and we do provide with our system set of instructions on how to determine the maximum span you can go with these tracks. When setting up your tracks, you'll need to connect adjacent tracks together. To do this is relatively simple. You need to first make sure that your tracks are butted end to end. The track connector bar has feet that slide down into the slots. When you've made contact, you need to pull the tracks apart. Once the track connector plate is in place, then you can secure the plate to the two tracks using the supplied bolts. There's 4 bolts per track connection, and hand tight only. These bolts are just designed to keep the tracks connected and the plates in place. They are not designed to see any force. All forces are transferred from the plate to the tracks. And there's a track connection. All right, so at this point, you're probably ready to start setting up your lines of track. You want to make sure that when you're setting up your track line that it's going in a straight line. And this can be done visually. It doesn't mean to be too rigorous on that. Your second line, you want to make sure it's running straight, but more importantly, you want to make sure that it's also running parallel to your first track. And to do this, you just need to be setting up your tracks with a tape measure, and as you're setting up your track line, you just ensure that as you're going, that you just measure and you make sure that your tracks are in fact running parallel. And we have a tolerance on our parallel, which is plus or minus a quarter inch, or about 6 millimeters, plus or minus 6 millimeters. Another aspect of track setup is the levelness of the tracks itself. You want to try and be as level as possible, and if you are going to be anything, a slight incline would be preferable that you would be sliding against. The system does allow a slight decline of 2%. So if you are sliding within a decline or an incline or plus or minus 2%, the system will operate safely. These systems are also designed to operate synchronously, in unison. So when your cylinders are pushing on your load, you want your cylinders to be pushing on the load at the same time, or else you get uneven forces on your load, which could cause damage to the load or could cause binding of the slider plates into the tracks. So in order to make sure that the system is pushing in unison, you want to make sure that the end of the slider plates, when you line it up, are both at the same distance from the load or equidistance from the load. If you can't do that, you've got to make sure that where your cylinder connects to the track, that those are in line and equidistant from one another. Sometimes you might have an interference in one track line where you need to pull a track up a little further, and so the ends of the tracks aren't in line. But as long as you have the edges of the ratchets in line, your system will push in unison. We also design our tracks to be bidirectional. That means you can set them up in any orientation, and the symmetry will allow the system to operate either way. This also allows you to move a load backwards or in the opposite direction. In case you move it a little too far and you skid your load a little too far, simply pick up the cylinders assemblies and the pusher heads, take it to the opposite end of the load, connect to the slider plate on that end, and push your load back as far as you need to its final position. So now at this point, you've got your track set up. You've got your two lines set up. You've ensured that they are parallel to one another, that they're level to within plus or minus 2%, that the ratchets are equidistant from each other, or the ends of the tracks are equidistant from the load, so that your system will push in unison. Now you're about ready to set the slider plates on, but before you do that, one of the most important things with operating this system is to ensure that your slide surfaces are free and clear of any dirt or debris. You can do that by just simply going along and sweeping off your tracks of any dirt and debris, and double check to make sure they're clean. If you do not take the time to do this step, serious damage can be done to the tracks if there's foreign material that gets caught in between the slider plate and the track surface. It can damage both the sliding surface of the track and the contact surface of the slider plate. At this point in the setup, you'll be ready to put on your slider plates onto the tracks. And I'll just stress again that prior to putting these on, that you clean your track surfaces and maybe even double check the bottom of your slide surface on the slider plates themselves. These should be also clean and free of debris and have a nice coating of graphite on them as well. We have three types of slider plates with this system. We have end sliders. End sliders, you can tell that they have the slots on the end to connect the pusher head to. So the pusher head simply slides over, align the slots, and push the tabs down. I'll go a little bit further and deeper into that a little later on. The slots should always be facing out. This allows you to connect a pusher head and a cylinder on the opposite end of your load in case you push too far. The three types of sliders we have are the male end slider, and you can tell that by the pegs on the ends opposite the slots on this slider plate. Then we have a female end slider plate, which has holes in it that allow connection of the male and the female. We also have a slider plate that's called an inner slider plate. And this slider plate, if you require full support of your load, or you need to have extra length slider plate, these slider plates have both a male and a female connection, so you can attach any number of inner slider plates between your male and female slider plates to accomplish a full load support or whatever you might need the continuous run of slider for. The tracks and slider plates for this system are more or less hand portable. The maximum weight is the slider plate. They're about 125 pounds. The tracks themselves are about 120 pounds. So they've come with handles. You just simply lift the slider plate up, place it on your track, and then slide the track into the slotted groove on your pusher head. And then the pusher head has two pins on the inside that hinge down, and they lock into the slots on the slider plates to allow connection between the two parts. Then connecting your next slider plate, simply pick it up, match the ends, male to female. Now your two slider plates are connected, and you'll notice that the slots on the female are facing out so that if need be, you can connect a pusher head on the opposite end and a cylinder to push your load in the opposite direction in case you've gone too far. So now you've got your load is jacked up. You've got your two lines of track underneath the load. You've got your slider plates on. You've got your pusher head connected. Now you're ready to lower your load onto your slider plates. So you want to make sure that before you lower your load, that when your load comes down and comes in contact with the slider plates, that the load is going to be flush up against the front face of the pusher head. This is a key critical aspect of proper operation of this system. The load has to be in full contact with this front face of the pusher head, and the contact needs to be at least as high, if not higher, than the center line of the rod end on the cylinder. What happens if it's not, then the load, when the cylinder pushes on the slider on the pusher head, it can actually push the pusher head forward and damage the slider plate and the pusher head. You also want to make sure prior to lowering your load onto the slider plates that the underside of the load that's going to come in contact with the system is clean and free of debris and suitably designed to support the weight of the load on the skid system. We also recommend using some type of friction material. Here I have a section of conveyor belt material. You could use plywood or any other type of rubber. It doesn't have to be very thick, just thick enough that it won't get damaged and fail by the load. And what this does is it protects the contact surfaces between your load and the slider plate and allows the load to more evenly distribute over the surface of the slider plate. If you do not assure that the load is evenly distributed over the surface of your slider plates, you can get into what we call a point load scenario. And when you point load this system, it will damage the slider plates. Again, we have supplied in the manual a data sheet that tells you the minimum contact area based on your load weight that you need to ensure is covered by the slider plates. So at this point, tracks are set up. Load is now sitting on your system. You've got some type of friction material between the load and the slider plates. Here I've got conveyor belt material. Your pusher head is connected to the slider plate. The load is making full contact with the front face of the pusher head. This is to prevent damage to the pusher head. Now you're ready to insert the cylinder onto the track and make contact with the pusher head. We recommend that if this is the first time using the system or first job of the day or when the system's been used in a while, you want to hook up your hydraulic hoses and run the cylinders out a couple times to ensure that both cylinders are operating properly. Sometimes you might have air entrained in the system, or if a coupler was damaged or there's a problem with one of the cylinders. If you don't do this step, one cylinder will be pushing properly, another cylinder will not, and your system will no longer push in unison, and it can cause damage to the load or to the system itself. In order to make the connection between the cylinder and the pusher head, the rod end attachment, it looks like a T, simply just slides under and up into the slotted sections on the pusher head. And then when you extend your cylinder, the rod end attachment will make contact with the front section of these uprights and start pushing your load. So that basically covers how to set up the system and get your load down onto the system. Your cylinder's now, support is now on the tracks, it's engaged with the pusher head, and now you're ready to operate the system. It's always a good idea to double check your entire setup before you start to slide, because the slide is the easiest part. It's just the hydraulic operator extending and retracting the cylinders. If setup was not done properly and partway through the slide there is a problem, your only recourse is to jack up the load, fix the problem, jack the load down and continue the slide, which is very time consuming. So it's always best to take the time up front, set the system up properly, double check it, make sure it's set up, and then begin sliding. The LP350 system comes with two safety stop blocks. These stop blocks are included in the system as an additional safety feature to prevent the unlikely condition of uncontrolled movement of the load. So what this device does is you would put it downstream of the direction of slide. So if you're sliding this way in this direction, the stop block has a wedge plate in the bottom. It would go down over a ratchet and it will engage in with the ratchet track and lock in place. We recommend only inserting the stop block one ratchet ahead of the slider plate, because if you install it too far downstream, momentum could build up in the runaway load. So what will actually happen is if the load does start to run away, so you have load on the slider plate's going to slide down, engage in the slot in the safety stop block and lock in place. Now what you have here is the safety stop block engage with the track, the slider plate engage with the stop block, and it won't be able to move. This now is actually locked in place, so if you want to continue your slide or you need to unlock this, this will be a problem. So what we've done is we've added this component to the safety stop block that will receive the rod end attachment of your push cylinder. So you just take your push cylinder from the opposite end of the load, insert it into the track, just in front of the safety stop block. The rod end will engage with the safety stop block in this component, and then you simply just extend your cylinder. It's going to push everything back, and now the stop block can be freed. So then to operate the system, the first thing you'd want to do is to attach 10,000 PSI suitable rated hydraulic hoses. It's always a good idea to have a clean rag on hand. We highly recommend it to clean all your hose connections and couplers. It's always a good idea with your rag too that you do not leave debris from the rag itself on there. That's a note I get from hydraulic guys that, yeah, guys clean their hose connections with rags out in the field. That's great, but then they end up pulling a lot of lint and fiber material that was from the rags out of their hydraulic systems. That's causing problems. So just double check, make sure it's clean. Do the same with the coupler on the cylinder. Make sure it's clean, free of debris. Once you do that, it's simply it's a nice quick connection. So you just put the two hose ends together and just hand tight. There's never a need to put a wrench on these couplers. However, they do need to be fully engaged. If the hose connections are not fully engaged, then you will have problems with cylinder operation, and I'll go over troubleshooting and problems with cylinders and the system later on in the video. So let's assume for a moment you did have some trouble getting the hose and connector coupler together hand tight, and that they weren't fully engaging due to pressure either in the cylinder or in the hoses themselves. Each system we supply has an Enerpack coupler bleed tool kit, and inside that kit has 3 parts. The center part is designed to thread on your hose fitting. It's identified as male, so this is a male hose end. It tells you which end that you attach to, so I'm attaching the male end. So we've got the center part section connected to the hose, it's put on a male hose coupling. I grab the male hose coupling pressure relief, and what I'll do is I'll thread this on, and as I'm threading it on, the end of this bolt is going to push uniformly down on the check ball on the hose connection, and it will, as I thread, it will open up that check ball and it will allow pressure to be released from the hose or the cylinder. So you just thread it down. If there's too much pressure and you can't hand thread it down, then you can put a wrench on the end of this bolt and wrench that until the pressure release. The pressure will release oil into this center compartment, and so you'd want to have a rag or a bucket underneath to catch the oil as it comes out. Once the oil's out, you just unscrew the pressure relief off, the hose connection, and your oil has now come out. And then you should be able to now get your couplers hand tight. So now your hoses are connected to your cylinder. Attach the other ends of the hoses to the proper ports on a suitable 10,000 PSI rated hydraulic power unit, and you're ready to operate the system. To operate the system, you simply extend and retract, extend the cylinder to full extension. That'll push the load forward. When you've maxed out the stroke on the cylinder, retract the cylinder. The load will hold the rod end in place, and the whole cylinder housing will pull forward and reset into the next ratchet track. Then when you've come to full retraction, extend the cylinder again, it'll push your load forward, go to full extension, retract the cylinder, it will reset into the next ratchet. Continue this operation until your load has reached its final destination. You've now pushed your load to its desired location. You'll jack the load up off the system, remove the system out from under the load, lower the load down into its final place. you've now finished using the system. The system then will need to be stored. It comes with its own storage box, so just put all the components back into the storage box. The system comes, all the components come with handles, so for hand portability, so use the handles to pick the pieces up, put them back in the box. Make sure the pieces are all clean and free of debris. Your cylinders, you'll want to make sure that for storage, the rod ends are fully retracted, that all the steel dust caps are in place, protecting the hose couplers, and the cylinders, store them in the storage box in a dry place as well. They need to be protected. Check your graphite surface. If you need to reapply graphite, do so before your next move, and consider the cure time that it takes for whatever version of slip plate you're using to make sure that it cures in the appropriate time. For transportation, the system box comes with forklift pockets, so it can be loaded on and unloaded off of a truck, and it also has lifting lugs on the top, so if you need to use a crane to, say, lower the system down into a pit or put it up on top of a building, you can hoist the unit using a crane. Most of the troubleshooting points that we get in problems when we have systems or feedback from customers with problems with the system has to do with hose couplers. The hose couplers need to be fully engaged, and even if they're not quite fully engaged, if they're a little bit not tight enough, the check balls inside the hose and the couplers will not function properly. So you might be able to extend the cylinder, but you won't be able to retract it, or you won't even be able to extend it. So if you're having problems with extending or retracting the cylinders, the first place to go is your hose connections, and ensure that all your hose connections are fully engaged and hand tight. You might think that you're tightening it and it's hand tight. If you can't get it anymore and you see that gap still with the coupler, I would definitely, the first thing, check that the hose or the cylinder isn't pressurized, and if it is, use your coupler bleed tool, depressurize the hose or the coupler, and then you should be able to get it fully hand tight. If you've checked and the hoses are all fully connected and hand tight, and there's still a problem with the cylinder, say it won't extend, then your slider plate could be bound in the track. So again, check to make sure that the slider plate or your tracks have actually been set up parallel and that they're traveling in a straight line. The load could also be heavier than what was reported. This system can push up to 350 tons, and if you were given an incorrect load weight and it's actually heavier than the capacity of the system, the cylinders aren't going to be able to move the load. So that would be another thing you'd want to check. Our cylinders come with an external pressure relief valve. So if you go to extend the cylinder and it extends, but when you go to retract, it won't retract, and the relief goes, whenever you see this external relief go, that most likely means your hose coupler on your retract side is not properly engaged, and double check that at the cylinder and at the pressure unit. If that doesn't fix the problem and your cylinder is still not functioning properly, there could be internal damage to the cylinder, so you should take the cylinder out of service and have it inspected and repaired by a certified hydraulic shop. The other thing you might find when you're extending your cylinder, it extends in spurts and it's kind of jerky and not extending smoothly. That's most likely air entrained in the system, especially the cylinder. So again, remove the cylinder, make sure the couplers are on the top so air can come up to the top of the cylinder. Run your cylinders out 3, 4, 5 times in order to get the air out of the cylinder. Once they're operating smoothly again, reinsert them into the pusher head and you're good to go. Another thing you might find is your load is not sliding in a straight line, so there could be two possibilities there. Either you have not set the tracks up in a straight line and parallel to one another, so double check that your tracks haven't come out of parallel, or the cylinders aren't pushing in unison, so one cylinder is pushing faster and ahead of the other. So pull your cylinders out, check them for proper operation, deal with any problems, and then bring your cylinders back into service. All right, well, I'd like to thank you for attending this short training video on our LP350 system. I hope it was informative, and I wish you all the best of luck with operating the system. But our service does not end here. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me or anyone at Hydra-Slide anytime, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.